And then is anyone recording right now for a second for a backup?
I am.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Climate change is not real. That's far from what I believe. But now that I have your attention, you need to know that climate change is something very serious and what you can do to help the Earth from warming too much. And if you're wondering why you should care, we all live on the Earth, don't we? We all want to keep living on the Earth. If we keep going down a current path, Earth will become miserable for all who inhabit it. And we need to know how to prevent that from happening. So how are we going to do that? First, we're going to talk about how drastically the climate has changed from years past, how it has changed in the present, and how it will continue to change in the future. We're going to talk about the sources of climate change. And finally, we're going to talk about what we can do to prevent it. The climate has clearly changed. Many people from both political spectrums are willing to accept that. So let's start in the past. We're not going to go back to the Ice Age, more like the late 1800s and 1900s. According to a current results article from 2021, the average temperature in the late 1800s to early 1900s was roughly 56.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Since then, the temperature has been expected to rise about 0.18 degrees Fahrenheit per decade. However, from the 90s to the 2000s, that number increased by 0.36 degrees Fahrenheit. And from the 2010s to the 20s, according to an EPA article in 2021, that number jumped to 0.54 degrees Fahrenheit. So temperatures are clearly rising, but the problem is that they're rising faster and faster. And current results projects that the Earth could continue this alarming rise so much that the Earth will warm about 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit in the next century. It's not just temperature that's increasing, however. Another factor that we need to worry about is CO2 emissions. A 2018 article from Down to Earth's Climate Change demonstrates how the Earth carbon dioxide emissions fluctuate naturally. From 400,000 to 50,000 years ago, the average amount of CO2 in the atmosphere in ppm parts per million was 180 to 280. In the modern era, less than 50,000 years ago, CO2 started at 180 ppm, but once it got to 280, it didn't stop increasing. It kept going, and even today, it still keeps rising. Today, there is 380 ppm of CO2 in our atmosphere, a drastic change from years before. And if a scale of 50,000 years is too big for you, let's look at it on a year-by-year basis. Last year, according to a 2021 CO2 Earth article, the average ppm in May was 417 ppm. This year, 2021, that number jumped to 419 ppm. It's a slight increase, sure, but an increase nonetheless. In 1950, there were 280 ppm of CO2 in our atmosphere. It only took 70 years for the CO2 to increase by 100 ppm, and just think what could happen in another 70. So now that we see that temperature and CO2 levels have clearly risen, let's examine some of the causes that may be contributing to this. In general, humans have certainly been the culprit of global warming, but what specifically? Let's go back to 1886, when the first automobile was invented. A 2021 Daimler article states that on January 29th, 1886, history was made when Carl Benz produced the first vehicle that ran on gasoline. Brands like Ford, Chevrolet, and Dodge would emerge in America as the top car manufacturer, and all of which relied on fossil fuels to make their products work. And if any of you remember chemistry or ever took a chemistry class, you remember how the combustion reaction that takes place in cars produces carbon dioxide. The CO2 then gets into the atmosphere, destroying the ozone layer, and thus exposing the sun to ultraviolet rays. It's not just carbon dioxide and fossil fuels that are polluting our Earth forever and contributing to global warming. Another factor that causes global warming is the huge amount of electricity that humans consume every day. According to the IEA from 2018, humans in 2018 consumed about 22,315 terawatts of power. And we have to get that power somewhere, and that somewhere is electrical plants. And according to the Union of Concerned Scientists from 2020, most power plants use coal to produce power. And if you've ever seen a coal-powered train, you've seen how much smoke and carbon dioxide they produce. And imagine that on an even bigger scale, and all the pollutants that rush into the atmosphere. It's these type of things that go largely unnoticed that are slowly killing our planet. So now that we've seen how the climate has changed and what's causing it to do so, let's talk about what you can do to keep the Earth green. And I know that not everyone can afford a Tesla or something else that's really expensive. So let's start small on something that everyone can do. Recycling. Believe it or not, there are many people in the US who doubt recycling because according to a 2015 State of the Planet article, many recycling bins become contaminated with non-recyclable items. And to that I say, don't blame recycling, blame the people. It's not that recycling doesn't work, because it clearly does. According to Junkyard Planet, travels in the billion-dollar trash trade. Anytime you use renewable resources or secondary resources, there's less carbon emitted than if you use primary resources. So recycling does reduce carbon emissions, but since some people don't see the benefits in them, the world doesn't see the full benefits of recycling. So it's up to you. All you have to do is separate trash from recycle, a 5-minute process at the most. That's all it takes to make a difference in climate change. Another option exists in the very debated use of solar panels. And not everyone can afford to install solar panels in their home, and I understand that, but it is a very viable option that significantly reduces carbon emissions, and that's because they don't rely on coal or other fossil fuels for power. Instead, they use the power of the sun and don't emit any carbon dioxide or other hazardous material into the atmosphere. Just like electric vehicles, they are relatively new technology, so it is understandable if that would be something you want to hold off on, but I implore you to try it if you ever get the chance. I've been in a solar powered home before, and I've noticed no difference at all from a conventional powered home. Another option that you might consider comes from an NRDC article from 2020. All it takes is for you to reduce your water consumption. And this can come in many forms. An easy thing that you can do yourself in no time are things like take shorter showers, or everything's as small as turning off the tap when you brush your teeth. According to the EPA, you use about 2.5 gallons of water per minute in the shower. So 10-minute shower, that means that you're using 25 gallons of water. But you slice that in half and you only use 12.5 gallons. So you can, if you just cut your shower by 5 minutes, you save 12.5 gallons of water. And if you're wondering why you should save water of all things, it's because water plants need power too. And they operate in a very similar fashion to electrical plants in that they emit hazardous material into the atmosphere. So reducing water consumption means that the plant will have to operate less and thus emit less into the atmosphere. And we've gone over a lot in the past 5 minutes or so. So let's conclude. We went over how the climate has changed from years past to present and how it will continue to get worse in the future. We discussed some of the sources of this climate change. And finally, we went over some easy solutions that you can do at home in no time to help prevent climate change. Like all of us, the Earth isn't getting any younger. Its time is running out and climate change has become a huge problem. So I implore you, do something about it. It doesn't have to be big, like buy a Tesla or go out and clean the oceans. Things like recycling or shortening your shower time will make a huge difference in the long run. Thank you. Any questions?
What made you choose this topic?
I was listening to a Rush song the other day. I think you were in my person of interest speech, right? So you remember Neil Peart, the Rush drummer, and he wrote a song about climate change and just how ignorant people are. So it just got me thinking, why not climate change?
How long did you say you had solar panels for, like in your house?
I didn't personally have solar power panels. I spent a week in a solar powered home in Santa Cruz, and I didn't notice any difference at all when it came to the fish or the quality of the power, or like having to recharge the solar panels or anything like that.
Oh, okay.
Do you think that corporations or the general public contribute more to like climate change?
Yeah. I'm sure that all of us probably have cars. I'm pretty sure. And we're all part of the general population, and probably our cars run on, fossil fuels. And so we don't think of much of it at the time, but eventually it does catch up to us. So I think that we're just contributing to it, but we don't really know how much we are contributing to it.
I really enjoyed your topic, and I do think that there needs to be light shedded on this because of the. Have you heard about Texas during the winter time? There was a huge winter storm, and there were a lot of people who have died.
Yeah.
And I know in Vegas we've hit 125 degrees, which is breaking. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to add that on there.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Is that it then? Everyone? Awesome. Thanks, guys.